Weird sciencey facts that boggle my mind. There's a new shroom that may help people go on one hell of a trip. So back in the 80s, the Soviet Union had this power plant. And then in 1986, it threw a temper tantrum and is like, I don't want to be a power plant anymore, and it had a meltdown. And because it was a nuclear power plant, it was kind of a big deal, and there was a bunch of radiation, and everybody had to leave, and now it's just a really cool level in Call of Duty. And to this day, it's still kind of off limits, because the radiation's bad, okay? Turns out that despite the marvelous tales Marvel tells you, nuclear radiation doesn't apparently give you spidey senses or super strength. It just gives you cancer, which is not nearly as helpful for fighting supervillains. But in spite of the apparently apocalyptic radiation, life has actually kind of thrived at Chernobyl. All the plants and animals looked around and they're like, hey, the people are gone. How bad can cancer really be? Which might kind of say something when nature prefers cancer to Caucasians. So it's been pretty incredible to see how well life has actually survived in spite of all of that radiation. But there's some life that isn't surviving in spite of it. It's thriving because of it. There's one funky fungus that thinks that radiation is pretty radical. The catastrophe at Chernobyl has allowed researchers to study radiation in the environment in ways that they've never been able to do before. And in 2007, some of these researchers sent a robot into the overreacting reactor. This is the place where the radiation is the absolute worst, a place that should be completely inhospitable to life, completely sterile. So it was pretty surprising when their robot found a black fungus growing on the walls. And everybody likes free samples, so they took some. It turns out that this extremophile radiotrophic fungus is black for the same reason some people are. It has a lot of melanin, which is the same stuff that makes people tan and also apparently gives them rhythm. This melanin not only protects the fungus from the extreme radiation, it actually feeds off of it. It ionizes it and uses it for energy. Not only does it organically process that radiation, it does it in a way that's non-toxic and harmless to other life forms, which is kind of a superpower that has some really cool implications. So researchers started doing a bunch of tests. First, they exposed this fungus to massive amounts of radiation, and it grew way faster than it would in just the natural environment. Then they injected some fungus that had never been exposed to extreme radiation with a bunch of melanin and gamma gunned the shit out of that. And it too hulked the hell out. So then they're like, hey, let's put it on the space station, because that's the next logical step. Because as it turns out, the sun is a giant nuclear reactor, and there's a lot of radiation in space. And while the radiation on the space station is low compared to other places in space, it's pretty high compared to ambient levels on Earth. And astronauts actually do tend to suffer higher rates of cancer because of it. By doing this experiment, they found out that in space, you just may want a fungus among us. Because it turns out the radiation levels below the fungus were actually 2% lower than ambient levels. 2% may not sound like a lot, but that would be about what it would take to make Mars safely habitable for humans. So if we do want to end up living on the red planet, a shroom room may just be the best way to do it. But it doesn't stop there. Some of the problems with long-distance space travel is making sure that you can provide enough food and energy for the trip. When trips are a few billion miles, it gets hard to pack enough snacks for the road. But because this fungus can process radiation into something that's not harmful, in theory, you can grow atomic shiitakes on the road. And because they can harness radiation energy, if we can figure out a way to harness them, we can make space travel portobello powered, potentially. But this fantastic fungi could also have some impacts a lot closer to home. If we can successfully figure out a way to harness them as an energy source, all that green glowing radioactive waste everybody's worried about could be our newest green energy. Suck on that, Ralph Nader. And on top of that, when it comes to cleaning up radioactive waste and radiation from nuclear accidents, it's long been the consensus that it can take hundreds or even thousands of years for the radiation to dissipate enough to make a place habitable again. But with this discovery, that all changes. In light of the discovery of the fungus with the atomic appetite, scientists are now doing research to see if they have to recalibrate their calculations to see how long it takes radiation to break down in the environment naturally. And if the fungus can be used in targeted ways to clean up unwanted radiation. And the fact that Marvel's marvelous tales about radioactive Avengers may have some accuracy after all, well, that is pretty mind-boggling.